Amanda, click on the PDF.
Good morning, Cynthia. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the workshop, City of Griffin Board of Commissioners, April 27, 2021. First item is continued discussion of the City of Griffin's nuisance abatement program. City Manager Jessica Connor, Planning and Development Director Chad Jacobs, and Building Official Brett Haynes will address. Welcome.
Good morning.
Happy Tuesday.
Yes. All right, y'all were sent a list of questions at the last Tuesday that we just need some guidance on, maybe some more discussion, but I will go through those with you. The first question is, should we continue with the abatement of approximately 40 to 50 single-family residential structures per year? And if so, do we believe that we are still adequately achieving our goal of dealing with substandard properties? That's sort of the impetus of how we even got to saying we need a substandard housing discussion. So if we don't believe that that is happening, or we don't believe that we're meeting our goals by doing it that way, do we believe that we could shift our focus to clusters of nuisance structures for maximum impact in certain areas? Or do we need to continue with individual properties, focusing on the worst at a time? And again, if you'll remember, this stems from a 2017 housing condition survey that we did in conjunction with the county and housing authority. We're pretty much done with the structures that were listed as dilapidated in that. They had dilapidated, poor, fair, good, and excellent. So of course, some of the ones that were poor are now dilapidated. Some that were fair have moved down, and some have moved up. So we can go back to that, but 4 years later, we're really going to be starting over. Or we can say we want to concentrate on a particular area. We also realize that single-family structures are no longer our biggest issue. It seems as though apartment complexes have really increased in tenant complaints in that area. So if we want to try and shift the focus there, we can do that, but that is going to be a little bit more novel for us. So probably take a little bit more time, effort, research, but that seems to be something that we have a problem with. And if that's the case, do we proceed just with those? And then also the last question that we have discussed at, I think 2 years ago's workshop, do we want to start looking at occupied structures? We do have some issues there as well. Sometimes they're occupied by the owner, which would then require us to relocate them if we tell them that it's unsafe to live there. That is not an easy decision. If it is landlord tenant by law, the landlord is required to relocate them, but a lot of times that doesn't happen, and there's really not much that we as the government can do to enforce it. So those are the couple questions we have left. You did help me with my Roseview question, so we're good to go with that one, but everything else I sort of need some direction. And timing wise, this is perfect because we are about to finalize a decision on the staff attorney. So whomever that will be, our two finalists are both female. When she comes in, I'd like to be able to give her some direction as to how we will proceed. So if y'all would like to discuss or have any particular questions, we do have the presentation that we can go look back through if we need to, as well as a map that we show where some of our critical mass properties are. I think Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Haynes might be able to speak to that a little better. I think they worked with Mr. Brian Haynes to get that together. So if you have any questions or however you want to proceed, just let me know.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
But I probably should have followed the instructions and asked prior to.
That's okay.
Here we are. Okay, so first question is, if we do decide to pursue the, what's the technical term, multi-family structures, does that mean that we completely turn our attention from single family, or how does that work? In obviously in concept.
I mean, we don't have to, but it would be, I think our problem is if we are trying to concentrate on sort of a novel way to handle nuisance abatement through apartment complexes, multi-family structures, where you can't just go in and say this particular apartment is substandard, so it needs to be torn down. You're looking at buildings and complexes. It is going to be a little bit more time consuming and difficult. So if we're just sort of doing onesie twosies throughout the city of single family, how do you want to prioritize and make sure that we're doing the right ones? It wouldn't be an absolutely no, we can't do it, and there probably will be circumstances where we're going to have to.
Right.
But I think the shift would certainly be towards multifamily.
Right, and I guess my question, I mean, in these questions, you do use the example of like fire or fallen tree, but my concern would be, if there is something that is deemed obviously unsafe, and not just unsightly, is the expectation that, oh, well, it's gonna have to wait 2 years until we kind of get the multifamily, or is there going to be some leeway for us to say, okay, break away from this for just a second because this is a health hazard or something to that extent?
Right, and I think we'd have to be able to do that. So yeah, if we've got, I mean, I can think of the one on Briarwood there for a long time where it had caught fire, and a lot of kids in the neighborhood were going through the glass door on the front, happened to still be there, but it was shattered. And they were going through it almost daily to play in the house that had been, almost destroyed by fire, but the stuff that was left was very dangerous for them. And the man that owned it was trying to wait on insurance proceeds, and at that point, we couldn't allow that to continue, somebody was going to get hurt. And so we went ahead and demolished it and then let them handle it through insurance, paying off the lien to us. So there's instances that we could certainly do that, but that would not be our primary focus unless it is something that bad.
Okay, the other question, I did look at the map, and again, I should have asked this prior, but does anyone have an idea what the largest cluster in terms of like acreage is that I can see where we've got 8 lots connected to each other that have been demoed, but I also don't know that those aren't quarter-acre lots.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if there's any idea of, and it doesn't have, it can be ballpark. I'm just trying to figure, is it 5 acres or do we have 15 acres somewhere?
I was gonna see, can you pull up the map that's attached to the agenda item? It's a different attachment. It's not on this one. Well, I'm actually not sure how you have it.
I think it was a different attachment.
Yeah, I'm just not sure if she's on the link. You may have to scroll down because the attachments just come down as the link.
You may know offhand, you know how many properties we have in nuisance abatement currently be working or on our short list that are in process, or we have like 25 that are in process?
Not quite that many. I would say about maybe 15, 20.
But that does not include the occupied.
No, all of those are vacant.
Okay.
Well, except for one, I think, and we're not 100% sure what it is on North 8. Did we figure out if someone was living there? Yeah. Oh, that's right. There are 2, one of which we can't tell if somebody's there. There's a car there and there's some stuff on the porch, but we can't tell if anybody's living there. Mr. Haynes has been out a couple times and can't catch anybody there. So we're thinking, trying to ask to see if everything's okay. The back of the house is caved in. So we don't think anybody's there, but we're not 100% sure. The one on South 15th Street is 337. It's right across from the police department. We've actually this is a gentleman that we've dealt with on several other nuisance properties. He knows he's not allowed to live there. He doesn't have power and water. He says he doesn't live there, but I think he has 3 dogs that are there, and he is there more often than he is not.
Is that owner occupied?
He owns it, yes, ma'am. He bought it. He buys these somehow at tax sales.
So if the house is that dilapidated and he owns it, we still can't request it. It's obviously it's not gonna do anything. So what is it? There's nothing we can do.
No, we can go in and say this is a nuisance, and we have revoked the certificate of occupancy on the property. He continues to take down the tags. And even if he doesn't seem to care. So, we could go in and file a nuisance abatement petition. The problem is if it is owner occupied and we tell him he can't stay there, we have to be willing to pay for him to have another place to stay.
Or an undetermined amount of time, or?
That relocation act, I'm not sure. And I don't, in his instance, he owns other properties, so I don't know if we could say, well, you need to go stay in one of these. All of that is something that we would really need to sort of start digging into because we haven't done it.
Okay, so I know I'm bouncing all over.
That's okay.
Okay, do y'all have an answer maybe about that?
So, remind me, Chad, the blue
So
is,
the blue is open space, the green is essentially where there were structures that have been torn down.
Mm-hmm,
So, and then on some of that, you may have had multiple structures, obviously, so, but just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a contrast, again, the green, where there's been a demo that's occurred as a result of nuisance abatement. Try to show y'all I think the area that really surprised me was kind of like, oh, how they work and all that. Like when the map kind of came out, I was like, oh, wow, we've been busy, kind of in that area. So another area, obviously, we're all very familiar with scales. There's been a lot of work that's done there. But we just kind of want to show, we're trying to look for like a mass of properties that we can deal with. The next kind of step, the next evolution of this would be to also do some layers on top to establish ownership. City of Griffin, Housing Authority, Land Bank, so obviously, when it's kind of within those entities, it makes it a little bit easier for us to kind of amass a lot of those tracks and figure out some possible redevelopment options. So, but this was to give y'all an idea of kind of what's taking place thus far.
so that still kind of goes back to my question of, and I don't expect anybody to know this right offhand, is, do you have any idea how large of a clump of demoed houses that we have?
I would think that the Edgewood, DF Fuller is probably the hugest chunk that we own,
Mm-hmm.
and has the most potential to have more quickly. We've already been approached by the land trust that owns the south side of Edgewood, sort of back to West College and even, I think, all the way to Merriweather. So that, and the land bank owns a bunch of properties right there as well. So ownership wise, although it doesn't really show, we couldn't get it as quickly as we wanted for this discussion, but it doesn't show ownership level. We know that that's a big potential right there.
And I would add to that, because it's a lot of those are little like 10th acre kind of
Yeah.
slivers, but
Right.
a bunch of them,
It's way
they're
up
adjacent
a
to
lot.
one another. So it's love to give you a solid,
Right.
the best answer to that, but it's,
Obviously, I should have asked before.
if you're looking for like acreage, versus kind of in terms of like the amount of adjacent properties that are next to one another, it's a little bit of a two-part.
Lincoln Road would be a good possible target. Well.
We've been having conversations on Lincoln.
Yeah, but the Lincoln Road, most of the rest of what's there is not substantial.
Right, so we
So
really do it.
you've sort of cleaned up the Tuskegee and Lincoln part, and the rest of Lincoln and Spelman and,
Atkinson.
yeah,
And we're even,
they're pretty good. So
we've been talking with Bob, at the top of the hill there, we've already combined two of those parcels into one, and they're looking to subdivide it into three and looking to do 3 ship houses at the top of the building.
Okay.
So,
I think our concern, even if you just listen now, we're all over the place.
Right.
So, which is fine, and we can continue that way. I think the question just becomes, are we making an impact the way that we possibly could if we choose either apartment complexes or an area? We have worked really hard in the Scales Westbrook area for the Park District, so I think my recommendation would be to try and concentrate there. Because the Housing Authority has done the terraces, we've acquired a lot of that land. If you've driven through that horseshoe of Westbrook and Scales, it's almost empty where we can market it. We've got a couple left that we've sort of told the Housing Authority, wait a second, and let's see where we want to go. Chad has a redevelopment plan that we would like to do this budget year that would concentrate in that southwest area as well. But really, if we want to be able to market it, you're also talking Ann Street, you're talking Beck, English. So to me, that's a great area because we're also, that you're working your way towards Merriweather, where we've already done the Oaks and the Iris, towards 15th and West College, DF Fuller, Edgewood. So that whole side is very ripe for redevelopment, but we really would have to say, this is where we want to go.
but from an infrastructure
And that's why I have a
perspective,
problem.
Right, right.
I'm all in agreement with that. But years ago, when we decided that we were gonna concentrate all our energies and put our monies over in that area, we neglected or stopped working on the north side where it needs it the most. And I could probably agree with concentrating on that area if we focus on the north side and attacking substandard housing that are occupied.
So,
So that,
go ahead.
so that whole crescent, if you basically take everything north of the railroad tracks, it's adjacent to what we've spent millions of dollars in downtown Griffin. It's got lots of vacant lots that could be redeveloped.
Where's that?
Anything north of the railroad tracks in terms of the first, second district. That, to me, I think the Park District is going to redevelop on its own without much more effort on our end. You know, all the substandard houses have basically been removed in that area. My passion is trying to figure out how do we get that redevelopment to happen in the Chapel East Central.
So I have a question. Of course I have a question. In terms of the responsibility we have, to vacating occupied homes, is there any potential for, like a partnership with the housing authority where those people may be able to get priority on the list?
They do that with us now. If there
Okay.
is ever, like with Roseview, when we had to do that, even though the landlord is supposed to pay, again, for how long, how do we enforce that? It's a civil matter at that point. And I think he did pay for one lady that didn't have anywhere to go for like a week at a hotel. That's a hard decision. That's 42 people.
Right.
So if you're talking an owner occupied structure, a lot of our owner occupied structures, at least that we've dealt with so far, are normally elderly people. And so they, whether or not they have family here, whether or not family would be able to take them in or could care for them. And that's a huge decision every time you're looking at a structure like that. So trying to figure out what our responsibility is by law, but then also socially,
Right.
that's a big deal.
I mean, I would love to see us, go after the owner occupied homes or those that are just occupied, period. Just because I think like that is the next step in where the substandard is, the substandard is left. But obviously, I'm concerned with displacing people.
Right.
And even to that extent, sometimes just having to move people out of the neighborhood, period. But I don't,
But it's not owner occupied, it's rental occupied that are substandard.
right, well, and,
Yes.
well, even there are some
Yeah,
owner
there may be
occupied
some
that
other- But I
are,
mean, but it's the occupied, landlord occupied that,
no, no, it doesn't matter who, if it's
Right.
tenant or,
but when you say it's just owner occupied, it's both.
yeah, no,
Yes.
that's what I said, or tenant occupied.
Yeah, just occupied in general is now really the problem. A lot of the vacant structures we have been able to handle.
Mhm.
There are some that we are finding that are supposed to be vacant and we have squatters in a lot of places. So they look occupied even though they're not legally there,
Mhm.
which is a whole nother discussion.
Right,
And then you have like the one we mentioned last time on Lane that is legally supposed to be occupied by one person who has rented it out to 11 more. Once you get into occupied, whether by landlord, tenant, or owner, it will be a much tougher case by case. It's not gonna be, here's my petition, there's nobody in it, let's demolish it. It will be almost a case by case basis, which again is fine and the law allows for that. But we're gonna have a lot more work to do as staff, so we'll have to say it's okay that we're doing 10. These 50 and 40 numbers, I realistically cannot tell you that will happen, at least not at first. And we'll have to do some legal research into the Uniform Relocation Act and what our responsibility will be. And that will take some money as well, if we do have some responsibility to relocate them. But we do have SPLOST that would allow us to pay for that, so.
and then my concern with that would be, again, is if we did attack those occupied structures, I would still want it to be with some cohesion so that we're we're not kind of piecemeal. So like if we're looking at this map and there is a clearly substandard property in between two that we've already dealt with, that's occupied, I would, and this is just my personal preference, I don't know how it actually works, but I would prefer that we go after that so that we have created kind of a block of cohesion, right? But then that can also look like a lot of other things. I know that like Fairmont will be coming back at some point. Do you have any idea when those people have gotten priority on the list, how long it's taken for them to be placed into a unit with the housing authority?
I don't know that they have been able to place anybody in the last year or so because of Fairmont and Nine Oaks being closed.
Mhm.
So, but we've also I don't think we've had to ask lately.
I know it's been closed.
Right, so and a couple of times that we have asked recently, the tenant wouldn't go. In the 2 instances I can remember off the top of my head, they had animals and you're not allowed to have animals and they were not willing to give that up. And so that was a couple of years ago, one on Spelman, I think it was, and then another one in town on West Poplar that we said, you can't live here, and they would not go.
Okay.
And I don't know what they did at
So
that point.
is an area, I'm just throwing this out there, say the area of using the railroad tracks, everything north of that, it's basically Dundee ball field, Dundee softball field, back all the way over to Second Street. Is that too big of an area in terms of what you think is doable, or do we need to take like North Hill Street back to Dundee Park, Thomas DeMille Village area?
I mean,
Give us an idea of what we give you
I think if we're saying, and what I'm hearing so far is definitely a concentration still on single family structures.
Oh, well, I was interested in multifamily, but obviously I'm just one.
Okay.
The multifamily that you're talking about, I mean, I'm aware of the properties. Do we know, I guess the ratio of what's vacant? Are they all occupied? Do we know? Or
The last time, I mean, we've worked most, I guess, diligently on Appleton lately because that's where we've had the most complaints. When we last checked based on active utility customers, I think they had about 80 units and 30 something of them were occupied still. A lot of them, and this started back in this time last year. And so in July, we went in and did an administrative search warrant. In between about March and July, a lot of the tenants were finding out that this was coming and they were appreciative, but also said, well, I don't want to live here then. If this is that bad and y'all are having to come in and do all this, and I'm moving. And they were able to find places to go. It seems that the bigger units, the 3 bedrooms there, it's that size family that can't find any place else to go. So those seem to be the most occupied still at Appleton. And that makes sense.
And where is Appleton, just for clarification?
That's the old Versailles on Poplar.
You know what the rent is on a 3-bedroom?
1,200.
Oh my gosh.
I think the singles are like 9,
Yeah,
something like that.
850 or 9. for
So in terms of, like research and preparation for, going after the multifamily, I don't want to abandon, again, this is my personal opinion. I don't want to abandon the single family, but I also don't want us to continue kicking this down the road where now it's 5 years later and we haven't even bothered to look at the process for it. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is there some way that we could dedicate some time to the research and preparation, and then maybe make a decision at that point, okay, this is what we found out about how we could manage it. Do you at this point want us to go ahead and pursue this, or is this too much? Is this not what we want? And then we go back to the single family. I don't know if does that take 6 months, a year, 2 years, but I don't want us to find ourselves saying, oh, it's 2030 and Appleton still has 15 occupied units, but there's all these other ones sitting there. And then we start saying at that point, oh, well, what are we gonna do? Like, at least for us to have a base of knowledge to work with. But I don't want us to go so deep into that process that we say, oh, for the next 2 years, we can't bother to look at anything else in the city. So I don't know where the compromise is for that. But I don't want us to be so focused on these individual lots that we allow those problems to continue to fester.
Well, and don't forget too, not everything has to go through the nuisance abatement process. We do still have code enforcement and we do still have the ability to cite if something is not up to code. So although that sometimes can take longer and not create quite the effect that a demolition can, you can still address it through code enforcement. And then also by nature, a new person looking at this, coming in after me being the one to look at it for 10 years, that in and of itself is going to create some kind of differences where they're gonna see it, new, and not have, and neither one of these that we interviewed have done nuisance abatement actions, but they both bring some interesting differences that I think will help with sort of process and be a little creative to say, here's what I think we can look at in this regard that I may not have thought of. So I think just by nature that may lend itself to a little bit different activity as well. I just hate to say, do it this way, and then we wanna say, no, we wanna just do apartments. But it sounds like, and y'all tell me if I'm wrong, but the consensus would be to continue doing single family structures, finding an area in which to concentrate, not worrying about whether or not they're occupied, once we figure out relocation and the responsibility there. And then also looking at apartment complexes and how that might in turn be handled through nuisance abatement as well.
I think what I'm hearing, I'm not interested in the numbers, I guess, that I don't want you guys to be pressured to feel like we gotta come back to say we've been able to do what we've done in the past and we took care of 30, 40, 50, 60 structures. Just want to see just some continued work. I think we all understand the process and that it's not easy. And we got multi-family, we have single family, we got different things going on. I don't want us to ever feel as if it's okay to say, no, we're not going to do it. But continue with it. We understand how the numbers, at least I do, that it won't be, we may not reach 20, 30, 40, 50. But if we can make a difference for 10, 15, I think that is a good start, and we're still making progress. We're not sitting on the sofa. So that would be whatever it's going to take to keep the program going and keep us moving forward, whether it's long steps or short steps, just keep moving forward. So I like your suggestion. Of course, City Park area is always good, bringing north side, wherever there are people living in those conditions, whether it's owner occupied, in apartments, whatever it may be. We, as a board, I guess, want to see our city residents taken care of, and that's our priority.
I kind of agree with what Doug said, but like I said, years ago, when we decided to focus all our attention and money over in the park area, the redevelopment, what we said was that we would come back. And I feel like this is what we've done because we went all over the city tearing down houses. But if we continued there and still focused on where the redevelopment is on the north side, and that's over at Fairmont, and there's another development. I feel like if we focused on substandard and dilapidated, we don't have to do the whole area at one time. Pick an area, and I would prefer the area around Fairmont going north to try to rid ourselves of the substandard and dilapidated to bring the whole neighborhood up. Like I said, we don't have to look at from Dundee Park to Second Street. It's a focus area so that we can go back because we had started to do that. I don't think that would be so much. We got areas like Lexington and Kentucky where we have a lot of lots. Those are areas that we can clean up. In the area around behind Moore School, we just, we don't have to choose one half of the city. Just a concentrated area where there's been some development that we can tag on to.
And with what's going on with Heritage Park, what's going on with Fairmont
Yeah.
Homes, and be able to, the square foot ministries built on
Like,
those
so
houses.
we pretty much taken care of or started in Carter Heights.
Yeah, correct.
And if you go north toward to the end of the city limits, it's not really a whole bunch that we would have to do in that area, but we could probably move forward. But I just feel like we need to concentrate something there. I don't have a problem with the rest of it. I feel like with what we've done, we've been able to tackle the apartments, which needs to be done. And continue to work, because the House Authority is gonna continue to work in that area. But just start to focus on designated areas on the north side.
I think for us, one of our biggest objectives was to make sure that y'all understood it's not like it was 10 years ago where you did have 30 properties where nobody was gonna come to court. They were very clear, I mean, they were falling in, they were either missing the back or had been destroyed by fire. We've handled that, and that's great, but I just wanted to make sure y'all realize, numbers wise, it's not that simple anymore, because we're getting to the ones that do have the possibility of rehabilitation, depending on who owns it, how they intend to work, because at the same time, just like you gave us the direction with Roseview, we're not to the point where we wanna say, okay, bring it back to, standard minimum code, and we'll work with you. These people deserve more than that, and some of the things that we're seeing pictures of lately these days, some of that is minimum code, but it's not okay. So that's
So
what we
low
want.
hanging fruit, if you see an opportunity, go after it. You know of certain apartment communities that do not meet minimum standards, be aggressive, and
Wait, I'm confused. How can we stay focused around Fairmont, but then if there's a park? No, but I thought you said if there's low hanging fruit, and then you said about the
Well,
apartment.
low hanging fruit of a house is just, there's some things that are out there we're currently working on and stuff that is low hanging, when I look at low hanging fruit that has one owner, you put the pressure on them if it's.
And you said code enforcement's doing that also. Do we know about on the scale of how many houses that are being focused on right now for this area that we're talking? I mean, well, it's all over the place, right? You're not focused on one area, you're just any house that has a complaint or it's substandard.
Well, and we do say that we have a proactive code enforcement program. We are not reactive. We don't just do complaints. We're thankfully up to 3 officers now, one of which is post-certified. And that helps tremendously, and they're really sort of hitting the ground and getting a lot done, which is not just structural. I mean, it's also property maintenance, just the actual grounds of the property, and cleanliness and that kind of thing. So they've really, in the last few months, been able to sort of learn what we want them to do and then be able to go out and do that. Of course, Officer Rainwater has been here, so she's been doing it, but she has some help now. And they're doing a good job. And then Mr. Haynes also works with them on the particulars of the International Property Maintenance Code, which is the structure for the most part that we use that for. So they can do that as well. They've been trained in looking at that, and they can help make that determination. This is something, I'm driving every day. And actually the one on North 8th that we don't know whether or not it's occupied, our code enforcement officer found. And he said, this is on a corner lot and the back of this house is caved in. And so he sent it to Mr. Haynes and he said, yeah, this is a problem. And so he was able to go out and revoke the certificate of occupancy and say, this is unsafe. So they do that as well. Yep, we can still use them.
So what do you have from us as a consensus?
Good question.
Because I'm confused.
I think that we do want to continue to do single-family structures, whether or not they're occupied or not. That it sounds like concentration is in the Fairmont area because of the redevelopment that's already occurring up there. But that we also, if there's some very dangerous burnt-out house or something, we will still address that regardless of where it is. That y'all understand that, 50 a year is not really a thing anymore. But that also, we realize that some of our issues are in apartment complexes, so although we may not be able to do nuisance abatement of entire complexes, we still need to look at how that, would work and possibly go that route if needed, if code enforcement can't do it.
That's what I was trying to say.
Maybe.
Well, low hanging fruit was what I meant in terms of if there's something that's a fire or something that's, I mean, it's an obvious nuisance. To me, that's what I look at versus someone that might have 20 heirs or.
So is that narrow enough for you guys to set goals around it, or have we essentially just told you to do the same stuff you've been doing?
How would the budget work with this?
Well, this is funded by SPOSS, and so we do still have one more payout, Marcus, of SPOSS, and we have some in reserves that we haven't used yet.
That's
So-
where the money's coming from.
About 1.2 million, I
Yes.
think you told us a couple of months ago, Marcus,
Mhm.
with what's coming in the future.
So in a couple, right, in a couple of years, we will have to say, look, we've spent all of our SPOSS and we need to decide what we want to do next, but I think we're okay for a year or so. Okay?
Sounds good.
Are you good?
Yeah, I really do think that that's helpful. I do. So I think we have,
We'll figure out a plan.
yeah, we'll have an idea of what to do. And then also I'm excited for somebody to have new, fresh eyes look at it too, because that in and of itself may help us be a little more creative.
I mean, in the past, I mean, I know I'm still kind of just a few years looking into the program. You've been at it for 10 years, but remember the day we took a drive about and we looked and kind of showed us, I mean, I can see on the map, but I guess up until this point, you have focused on the unoccupied. And you did show us some apartment complexes that you need to tackle. So I guess when I want to move forward and say, I still want to focus definitely on the single family, but that is alarming that we have 80 units unoccupied, I mean, in that apartment complex, so.
Well, you can look at it either way. I'm sort of glad that they self-policed and said, this isn't, I don't want to pay somebody to live in this, and we're able to go somewhere else. I worry about the 30 that remain, that can't find somewhere else. And again, those numbers are about 5 or 6 months ago, so they may have changed, but that was when we looked at it last and we had talked with the owner. So. But yeah, if we get to the point where there's really nobody living there, then let's start over and
And
build
tenant-
something that.
The tenant complaint system we currently have, the housing authority is working. It's
Very
on a
well.
regular basis.
Very
So,
well.
Maybe we do a little more promotion of that to,
Mr. Haynes worked on that last night, actually,
So we do a
letting
little
some
more
residents know.
promotion.
Mhm.
so that folks know there is an option if they've got an issue to.
Yes, that has been a tremendous help because they're able to sort of help resolve some issues that maybe the landlord didn't know or the tenant didn't know, well, that's how it is. They've helped with some, learning, educating on leases and that's been a huge help. And then when it gets to the point where there's nothing else they can do, either the tenant doesn't understand or the landlord doesn't understand, then they can send it to us and we become the enforcement mechanism instead of also trying to be the mediator. It has been a huge help.
And we'd also talked about at our annual retreat about the workshop, about the county has a 6-month, if utilities go out for 6 months, there's a life safety inspection that the county requires. To what extent are we with the city right now? Right now, I think our number is 6 months, but do we at that point require life safety that would give us the opportunity to go into a home and do inspections and say, hey, utility's been off for 6 months, house, the toilet's falling through the floor, kitchen sinks are rusted out. Do we have the ability to put that?
I don't know that it gives us the ability to do that. It gives us the ability to check about utilities, life safety issues.
But smoke alarms,
That's more fire, and I don't know that they get involved in that regard.
but what is the county, Chad, you were with the county, was it the county, from what I remember, used to have.
County,
you had to
it was a
prove-
general safety inspection, so like Eric was going out and, you'd have the electrician pull the permit. So it's good, having him, with the state license, pulling the permit. And then Eric would go out and kind of just do a walk around, look at smoke detectors, the outlets, things like that, make sure that there was nothing glaring that would be a potential safety hazard.
And is there a difference between he's using the term life safety, you're using the term general safety. Is that a technical term or is that just how we, it's just whatever?
Technical term, and it'd be one of those, I don't know kind of how Brett and them are doing it, county versus city in terms of that 6 month no power. Like I said, for what we were doing, and then I believe Charles had to carry that over to the county, it was just making sure you don't have exposed wires, on your outlets and things that small little safety fire hazards.
But before they would issue a CO for you to turn
Well, it's
utilities
not
back.
CO, it was before he would release it.
Release it for power to be turned back onto the property, they'd have to have all, from what I remember.
And we actually go a step beyond that, since we are the power company. There are times that we go out and we do what we call green tag. If we think that something is unsafe in there, we'll go ahead and green tag that meter and say, this cannot be turned back on until you contact us. We think there's a problem. It doesn't even have to be 6 months. It might be occupied at that time, and we say something, we don't think this is good. We make a note in the system that before they change power to somebody else's name or turn it back on, they have to come see planning and development to possibly do an entire inspection.
I'm just trying to figure out a trigger, a 6 month trigger, power's off, it gives us a chance to get into a property and be able to
Correct.
fix.
We do require access inside the property. We check everything out. For all intents and purposes, of course, we check out the electrical. That's the one, they want power. We'll check out the electrical system. But we also perform a property maintenance inspection. If someone wants power on, but we see siding falling off, we try to dilapidate HS off, things like that, we're not going to release power since we do have the utility company. We can use that and we say, you got to fix X, Y, and Z before we will release those. Those are things you don't need 200 amps to do that or something. So we do use that as a tool to make sure that that gets corrected before we release power. Because once we release power, we'll never ever release that. So we do, yes, we do a life safety inspection. If we go in, floor scaving in, say we can see visible rot from a leak in a toilet or a sink or something like that, we'll require all of that to be repaired before we will send a release to customer service with power generator.
And I think that, if we can make sure that's being implemented,
The trigger for that
trigger
is,
6 months of no power,
6 months.
and then that way we can get the eyeballs into the properties.
but we don't know that unless someone comes in and applies for power, and then we find out that it's been off for 6 months or something, right? I mean, that's how we find that out.
Well, I mean, yeah, for the most part. Unless we see it and like I said, we green tag it even before 6 months, even vacant, occupied, anything, that would also be noted too. So there's two different things.
But I knew the partnership with Central GMC had with the county was, if they showed that they had 6 months no power, they required the county, they basically had an agreement, my understanding, with the county to make them go through that process.
They did, and again, here at the city, we're dealing with the city power company. At the county, it was the city, which was easy to work with, EMC, Georgia Power, Southern Rivers, and there were some companies that were easier, that would work with you on that, and some that would they would hit it anyways, so it was, I don't know if it's still like that. I wasn't gonna call them out, but yes.
So, Jessica, so we're gonna have close to $1 million coming in from SPOS.
We have that now.
We have that now.
Yes.
And that's going to allow us to tackle whatever, when you get the new attorney and then our consensus with what. So then in 2 years, you might have to ask for more from.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years, we may have to come back and say, we've spent all this and we need, more direction at this point, and how do you want to fund it? It used to be that it was funded by general fund, $100,000 out of planning and development's budget, until we had the SLOSS passed in 2016, and that happened in 2010, which is what I can remember.
And so what we're looking at now in the target area and what we want to do, where do you think we will fall within that budget? How much, is that enough to cover or make another big dent, or keep being very progressive with it, very aggressive with it?
I think so. A typical house these days that is torn down and has to be disposed of is $6,000 to $10,000. But there are so many caveats to that. I try not to say those figures because you run into asbestos and you could have $50,000 worth of asbestos that has to be abated. We do use our public works department to tear down structures, but we have to pay them. So their hourly rate is included in that. We don't mark it up or anything, so it's still just one of their duties that they have done that day. But we also pay to dispose of it in the landfill, which is a whole nother discussion because the more that we do, the more capacity that we reach in the landfill. So we have certainly attributed to our remaining capacity report when that increases every year. But you gotta do what you gotta do.
Any other questions?
What is the agreement about this 6-month inspection? I'm not, because,
We do that, I'm not sure.
oh, okay, then it's
Yeah,
already in
we'll
place.
Continue to do it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Anything else? Thank you, team. Moving into discuss potential November 2021 T-Splost, Jessica O'Connor and Public
And
Director
Chris
Griffin
is-
will address.
He's out still.
He's out.
Yeah,
Okay.
he ended up having a medical emergency with family, so he will not be here, but I think Dr. Keller can help me with it. As you all know, the county they have a lot of meetings, one of their meetings recently, called for a T-Splost. And at the same time, within that discussion, mentioned a SPLOST as well. They have asked all of us to get together on May 6th at 4 o'clock to have a joint meeting. I haven't gotten official notice of that yet, but everybody seemed to be okay with that date. They, at their meeting, they did go through, a 60-month split at an estimate of $800,000 per month, and that would be $48 million in collections. They would have to have the cities on board with that to have the full 1% tax to get that $48 million. If they chose to go it alone, they can only do 75% of 1 cent for a total collection of $36 million. They mentioned in their agenda item that the last T-Splost referendum, the split was 66.5 for the county and 33.5 for the city. And each of us was going to take a project for Orchard Hill and Sunnyside respectively. If we did do the split the same way and collections were used at an estimate of $800,000 per month, the county would receive $31.92 million. The city of Griffin would receive $16.08. Dr. Keller, Mr. Walker, and I have already met a few times and discussed that referendum as well as projects. We don't think we have any problem with figuring out projects. We could do that pretty much today. And we did when we were talking. So that's really not the point of this discussion, although I did include the 2017 projects that you wanted to do. So you would just sort of know where we started last time. Of course, that one did not pass. In our belief, we need to do a lot of milling and repaving. So that would be a lot of the money spent there. There's also some intersection improvements sort of throughout the city that could be helpful. And then there has been a discussion about paying debt for the airport. I'm not sure that I can make that recommendation at this time, but that has been talked about, as well as possibly a few sidewalks, and then downtown parking is going to be an issue soon as well. So the main thing that we needed to know before we go into the May 6th meeting is what you are comfortable with in an allocation between us and the county. Our lost allocation was last negotiated in 2012, so we'll have to do that again next year. That current split is 59.5 to the county, 40.5 to the city. If you'll remember, both the county and the city started with consultants to come in and do sort of a survey and study as to what they felt it would be. I think the county said it should be like 72% to the county, the rest to the city. The city said almost the exact opposite, 69% to the city and the rest to the county. So y'all know that this also sort of comes into play with service delivery strategy, which is also due next year. There's a lot sort of at stake, and Dr. Keller may want to jump in here as well. But we also know how much $60 million would help us at that 33.5% split. I think my concern is if we do agree to that at this point, and we go into loss negotiations within a year, they're going to say, well, what was the difference? Why were you okay with it then and not now? And I certainly could not agree to a loss split at 33.5. And couldn't make that recommendation to you all either. So I need some direction. I think we need to discuss and all be on the same page before we go to that May 6th meeting to talk about it.
Let me ask a question too. I don't know where this is gonna fit, but Congress has already passed what's called the American Recovery Plan. About a fifth of the money that they allocated goes to transportation projects. That money, I understand, is to be distributed next week, 1st of May, and applications are gonna be taken. And basically, that money should be spent during the remainder, or at least started to be spent during the remainder of this current calendar year. Now, what I was told last week, those have to basically be shovel-ready projects. But I think Brant has some in transportation that he could.
That's not transportation. There's two different buckets of money you're talking about. The one bucket that's got to be shovel-ready right now is either going to be loan repayment or debt repayment to ratepayers that have to deal with money. It also has to do with three other parameters. One's water, one's wastewater, and one's broadband. The bucket that you're talking about is a different bucket.
All right, now you've got this infrastructure bill that Biden's pushing, which is yet to be passed by Congress, but is expected to be passed this summer. That money is going to probably be out there for 4 or 5 years. And here again, you're probably going to find a lot of transportation money because I understand job creation, putting people to work is part of the objective behind it.
But the money they're sending down for the first bucket you're talking about is a direct allocation. It goes to the state directly to the city of Griffin for 7 and change. The other money that you're talking about is we have no direction from Treasury yet. Once Treasury supposedly is going to get, because that's a big bucket of money you're talking about. The issue with the direction from Treasury is it going to the state for allocation to local government, or is it going to the state for the state to fund their transportation projects? That the Treasury Department is yet to differentiate. They have spoke on the 7.5 and the county's 12.
What I heard at the seminar I attended last week, the money for the cities under 50,000 in size, which would be us, will come through the state, but it's got to come to us. The state
As a direct distribution, correct.
So, right.
50% by the end of the middle of next year, and the remaining 50% got to be spent by 2023.
I think all of that just shows that we're not real sure yet what's gonna happen with ARP stuff. So I'm not sure that I really wanna try and figure that out at the same time that we need to decide what we wanna do with T-SLOS on the 6th. We do have another call with GMA tomorrow, or Thursday to discuss, but we don't have Treasury guidance. They said it would be out 6 to 8 weeks after adoption. We're getting close to that time, so we do expect it soon, but that's a lot of speculation.
There's something came out last week that I did send to you and to Marcus, I think.
It's just saying we gotta have a DUNS number, which we have.
We have.
We've got all that stuff, so that's handled. It's just, and if you ask these people back here, they've already spent your 7.2 million.
And we don't need a SAM's number, so we're good.
My comment on this, I would never go under what we already given. So I would be in favor of keeping it at what did you say the number was?
33.5%.
Well, that's
That was
what we agreed to in 2017. It was never passed. Our current lost allocation is 40.5, and they received 59.5.
That's what I'd say.
Which one is that, Mr. Moore?
40, what we currently.
40.5 to 55.5?
59.
59, I'm sorry, 59, my bad.
And then that was
That
put
was
in.
just one thought. If we did the 33.5, 66.5, the difference of us being potentially shorted 7% I know they're looking at doing, we talked about the trail system and stuff with the board, consider saying we would take 33.5% if you put, say, the 7% difference towards the trail network that we were, as a joint type of county-city project.
Y'all be mindful, we're on a short window. We have to enter into LGA. There ain't gonna be a whole lot of negotiation, okay? Because the time frame that's there is so compressed. We need to decide whether we're happy with the price point we have at 66 and 33 and move forward on this and worry about loss shortly this year, hopefully. But you're on a compressed window. There ain't gonna be I'll be honest with you, there ain't gonna be a negotiation. Either we're going or we're not going.
And if this does pass, they're gonna come back with a SPOS future referendum to reduce SPOS. Right now, we've got about $7 million in our budget on current SPOS. If we've got a T-SPOS, that means that we won't necessarily have to put SPOS, transportation in the next SPOS.
Well, there's a little bit of discussion about that as well that Drew and I need to sit down and talk about. Mr. Wilson, like I said, in this agenda item, when they heard it on April 14th, he told them at that time they also had to do a SPOS referendum in November in order to be able to hold a T-SPOS. So whether or not.
I missed that. Who said they had to do it?
Mr. Wilson.
Okay.
So when he reached out to me that same week, he said, we've got to do a SPOS too. I'm not sure if that means in March or November. So that discussion is also happening now. And it's a
Or
little
maybe we
bit,
say we accept the 33.5, 66.5, if you'll agree to when the loss comes up for negotiation, that you agree to the 40.5.
Right. and I'm not sure that I agree with the 40 and a half.
Negotiate. I think we asked, and then we just understand that given past precedents, it's gonna be what it's gonna be.
And I did just pull back out the sales tax distribution that the city did. Your consultant at that time said that you were at 79.9%. So I'm not sure that 40.5 is equitable either. And based on a lot of the services that Ms. Irizarry and I went through the last year and a half, I think that's debatable as well.
But when we see the census numbers, our population is going to stay about the same, but the county is going to show an increase, which is going to put us instead of a 40.5%, 40%, 40-60 ratio, it's probably going to put us closer to a 33.
Well, and that's one
ratio.
pillar of 8 that you do look at for lost, but that's only one of 8 factors. And the other services that are provided, I have learned in my adventures as a baseball mom that some of them aren't quite what I thought the county provided. So
And a soccer mom, yeah.
no. So I mean, and that's just one very, very simple example, but I do think that there is definitely some room for discussion even at the 40.5% level. So I certainly wouldn't want to go in and say, we'll do 33.5% as long as you're willing to do 40.5% at loss negotiation.
So the county can go in and say, well, we're not going to include you, we're going to
Yes.
have a vote for 75, we'll do 75%,
That's correct.
and then we can.
In my opinion, and based on the voting districts that we have, they would not pass a T-SPOS without the city residents. So they would be taking a large risk to do that.
Why didn't it go through, you said in 2017?
They just failed.
Pass referendum failed.
Mhm. The voters said no, and there's a lot of contention about this one. And we've already heard from several groups that said we will not approve this. So I think the only way to get something passed at this point is to make it very clear that these are necessities. So milling and repaving, we have a street problem. We have 125 miles of street.
138 miles.
38 miles of street, and we pave about a mile a year, and you're supposed to pave streets every 25 years. We're never gonna catch up. And we have never been able to fund transportation projects in our general fund since 1993 at least.
Since I've been here, if it wasn't for Splosh and now T-Splosh, and don't get too excited, if we do have a Splosh, you're probably gonna have some more paving. If we use the 16 million, I did the analysis here for nothing but milling, repaving, you'd still only get 57 miles out of the 138 miles of paving. You're talking 250 to 275 a mile because of manholes, milling, paving, whatever. We're infrastructure in this country, what we call horizontal assets is out of sight, out of mind. Even we consider streets out of sight, out of mind when it comes to funding. So the issue is it costs a lot of money, and you got to look at what you want your community to look like down the road. you want people to move here into $250,000 houses, you might want to have some asphalt on it, not gravel.
Can we leverage this money with the state?
Yeah, what you would do is you get your projects, put them in the tip. Be mindful, resurfacing and milling is not eligible for the tip, but some of the intersections like Hammond Drive and some of the areas. So if you have a subject matter project that will qualify, you put it in the tip and then they allocate it into the ARC and then they spread it across the board. So your answer is yes, it'd be an 80-20 split. But milling and resurfacing is not an eligible project to be put in the tip. That's why it's critical that they force people to put transportation slots out there to put the rubber on a road.
Mr. McCord said that he said 40 and a half, 59 and a half. What's the rest of the board's thought? I'm happy, personally, I'm good with the 33.5%. That's better than.
I would like us to ask very sternly and politely, and then when they tell us no, say, okay, we'll take that 33. But can't get nothing if you don't ask. And y'all put up a valiant effort, but then when they tell us no, just say, all right, cool, we'll do what y'all said.
At the same meeting.
Yeah.
No, we're gonna have to, if we want 33 and a half, because we don't have any time.
Yep.
But, they're listening now, so they already know what we're saying.
I know. Well, they know we gonna ask, and they know you'll put forth a really good effort, and
I'll bring my argument in my
Yes.
case, yeah.
And then we can use that as evidence for later discussions
Yes.
about something else.
I think that's worthwhile. Commissioner Murray, you okay with that?
Yes.
Commissioner Brown?
Good.
And that meeting is scheduled, is that a joint meeting we have with them?
Yes, May 6th at 4. I'm assuming since they have requested it and called it, it will be there, but again, I haven't received that official notice, so as soon as I do, I'll let y'all
You
know.
said it's May what?
6th at 4, that's a Thursday, May.
Any other questions on this matter? And could y'all find out what this money that's moving downstream from the feds, we're supposed to get around 7 million? Is repayment of debts in terms of like the airport, one of those things that we can pay off? Or
I don't
It
think.
has to do with utilities, it's got to do with broadband, basically two things, broadband, water, wastewater, that's basically it.
so then on the broadband side, we could potentially use that possible money to, in our broadband plan, fiber system.
Maybe. They haven't given us direction yet, so we can't, it's all speculation until, they already did the big cities and they started putting out information last week on the larger cities. We're still waiting for the 50,000 and below category.
Ms.
Thank you.
Ward, you're okay with the 40 and a half at first, and we'll settle for the other?
Yes, we would like you to go on record as saying that we are settling.
Definitely.
All right, moving to the next item, provide an update regarding the potential joint water authority as contemplated in the December 9, 2020 water sales agreement with the Spalding County Water and Sewage Facility Authority to discuss the city's requirements for a joint authority to be a viable option.
I'm sorry. There's a lot going on. Okay, next thing. As you all, I hope remember, we did have in our water sales agreement that was reached back in December, we did have a provision that said that we would also discuss the potential of a viable joint water authority between the city and the Spalding County Water Authority. And so the time has come, we have had a few meetings, and the time has come to bring this back to you all. Mayor Holberg and Commissioner Ward have been present, and we have been asked to discuss what are our absolute have to happens in order for us to say we will join a joint authority. I've asked Mr. Camp to come because as staff has discussed, we believe that our debt and the assumption of that debt by the joint authority is an absolute requirement. We can't continue to assume that debt and then also figure out how to help the county expand and do anything else and possibly update their system to the extent that we have. So that gets real complicated as to what you can and can't do. Mr. Whalen has talked about it several times, Dr. Keller, Mr. Camp, so that's not my area of expertise. I'm sort of gonna let them talk to y'all about that, and then we have a couple other things that we wanted to address too, but Mr. Camp, you want to start for us?
Good morning. It's been a long time.
I know, sir. Good to be here with y'all. This is a new one, you know, I've helped y'all with borrowing money before, your GO bonds, your airport authority. And I assisted y'all on the 12 CPU bonds, that's the combined public utility. So you have a tremendous number of experts on your staff, and I've talked to all of them. And I appreciate being a person that you've asked to come. Tomorrow, one of my coworkers is going to be at that committee meeting. Todd Barnes, my coworker, has assisted the county in the past, including their water authority issuance of a series of bonds. And I think that what I can do, maybe since I'm not a resident, I'm not an employee, I'm a little more neutral about the concept. So Connor wanted me to talk about how could we, let's start with the debt. How could we become unentangled from our obligations under the combined public utility? So the security for those bonds is your water.
Why don't you tell them basically what the debt is to start off?
Yes, sir.
They have an idea.
Yes, sir. Thank you. In 2012, we refunded, that's bond lingo for refinance, the prior bonds. And your outstanding on that transaction is $42,775,000 is the general amount it would take to defease that series of bonds. It was 57.5 back then in 12 when we borrowed it. And our bonds outstanding are about, principal amount outstanding is about 40 million and change. Sorry, I don't have that number right in front of me. The security for those bonds, if I'm an investor and I own some of your bonds, I get a lien on the water and sewer revenues as well as the electric. So if an authority was going to take over your water sewer system, we would have to create a mechanism to pay off all of that obligation. We have a call date, that is the ability for you to pay off those bonds early, January 1 of 23. So a mechanism, which is, we call it an escrow, would be to deposit funds, reinvest those funds in state and local government securities, which are issued by the U.S. Treasury. And the purpose of that account would be to pay the interest, pay the principal to the bondholders through 2023. And that number alone would be $42,775,000 about. Okay. The GFA loans, we believe, could be assumed by this new authority. In other words, it goes from being the city of Griffin's loan through GFA to this joint authority. There's also issues associated with transfers that you are historically have been taking from the water sewer system. So there needs to be a way to, a fund, so to speak, to cover those transfers. In other words, purchase price, if I was selling something and I wanted to be totally neutral, I would want to sell it for the debt I've got on it or a mechanism to defease that debt, plus whatever benefits I was receiving from that asset. Okay. Something I can't really speak to yet are the people. The benefits, the retirement benefits, the individuals at your city system and also at the county that would be absorbed by this new entity. That's a big picture item, but I do think that there's a way, if you're just dispassionate about it, I do think there is a way to come up with a neutral number, a purchase price where the city would say, we could sell this. We are not harmed. We're neutral. We're not harmed. We're not making out like bandits, but we're made whole. There's got to be a number that works for you, and there's probably a number that works for the county.
So my biggest concern is the people that we serve. Right now, our water rates are about 50, because county rates are 1.5 times what our city rates are. And so if we did the great combination of everything, how is it going to affect our direct customers in terms of water and sewer rates? And if our current customers end up with a higher utility rate because of our actions, to me, I think we're doing our citizens a disservice. So in the grand scheme of things, that is my top priority, as well as the $1.8 million in terms of the cash flow issue as well. So,
Well, the issue, as Bill addressed, is that number that's gonna make you whole. The number that's gonna make you whole is not gonna exist. When you have a joint authority and you take our assets, their assets, put it together, we'll probably be compensated for some assets, okay? We got a lot of vertical assets that are brand new out there. But the bottom line is, and this was my closing remarks for the day, you are not gonna make the city of Griffin residents, let's not even talk about ratepayers. You will never be able to meet that number. You will have an effect on your rate, on your taxpayer in order to compensate. And I'm not gonna get into that magic number that we don't really wanna talk about. You're never gonna be made whole. Your taxpayers will pay once this is done somewhere down along the line. You may have a window of 10 years, you may have a window of 15, could have a window of 20. But somewhere down the line, the taxpayer is going to take it and have to address those issues through paying additional taxes in order for the general fund to do what it's got to do. And that's the deal breaker for me, is the taxpayers. I've been working here 30 years. You've heard me say that before. I work for ratepayers, I work for my taxpayers. Just till recently, I was over both public works and the rate. Our people don't need to take it in the shorts because we make a bad business decision. And in my opinion, this is a bad business decision for the taxpayers of the city of Griffin.
any other comments from commissioners?
I certainly agree with what Brant just told y'all. I've represented this city now for a long time in the utilities of the city. And I don't think, honestly, the county has ever understood the relationship between you and your utilities. And the fact that you don't run these utility businesses to generate a profit. But the proceeds, the revenues that come off of it are used to reduce your taxes. I think even going back to the days of consolidation, the 2 attempts that were voted down, there was always resentment of the fact that the city had this source of revenue that the county would never have. And I think that carries over today. And I just don't see how this can be good for the city of Griffin. And I'm going like Brant, I think I've said enough. I'll stop at that. But, you know, we'll be happy to answer any questions y'all have, and that's why Bill's here today.
Board, do y'all have any comments, statements?
I agree with the two gentlemen.
And they hit it on the head.
So, Ms. O'Connor, do you feel comfortable expressing this opinion tomorrow at the Joint Authority? Or what direction you need in terms of
I
specific
do,
language that you want from us?
There's well, a couple other things that we also need to address. So at the Water Authority meeting last week, 2 weeks, they approved the expenditure of up to $500,000 to be split with the city to value the systems, to decide if there's any way to move forward. I cannot in good faith recommend a $250,000 asset valuation at this point. Dr. Keller talked with Raftellus
6 months ago.
Yeah.
we had this on.
about 6 months ago when we started talking about this in the water sales agreement and asked them what they would do in order to value the system. I think it was about $50,000 for that. So the authority does want to know what we are willing to do. And again, it came up because we sort of needed to know, first, we need to discuss these non-negotiables or deal breakers. And if that is never going to work, then we don't need to spend any money to value anything. If we believe that it's worth figuring out how much our system and their system is worth to figure out what that number is that they would need to pay to keep us whole, then we do need to take that step. But our staff recommendation is not $250,000. We think what Raftellus can provide at this point will be sufficient. What they've done is they had Paragon draft a scope of services RFP to even put out to somebody to say, this is what we want you to value. And because the valuation is an income approach, a market approach, a cost approach, it goes through really an actuarial study of the employees of the retirement system, all of those things. That's why it is so expensive. But if we're not going to get past these deal breakers, then I don't foresee it making financial sense to ask y'all to spend $250,000. So I think the direction I need is do you want to authorize the expenditure of anything at this point? Or do you want to just say, we've got to talk about this and come up with whatever their non-negotiables are versus our non-negotiables, and then we can come back.
And there's also the point about that we're not going to be managing, we're not going to be doing their billing, their customer service. And that was a point that continually came up, that their assumption that we were going to take doing business as usual, we run this system, we collect the money.
That's sort of how we do for the airport, and that's not a
Right. So
balance.
if they're going to be in the business, then
They
they
need
would
to-
they need to be in the business and take ownership of all the assets and figure out how to build and do all that fun.
Just be mindful, tomorrow you and Ms. Ward will be at the meeting or whenever the next meeting is, okay? You're gonna be pressured, okay, that everything's negotiable. Not everything in life is always negotiable, and my glass usually is 50% plus full, but there's certain things in this business transaction that does not make good business sense for the city. And to hear the fact that everything's negotiable and everything's got a price is BS, because the BS is we're gonna end up having potentially have some rate changes on taxes if we go down this road. And that's a fact, okay? And no, maybe I'm just getting old and crotchety, but my taxpayers are important to me, and you will feel it on the election day if you make the wrong decision. And it's being recorded. I'm on the record.
So
Okay.
everybody,
So proceed with those discussions on non-negotiables. Do we want to have any authority for expenditure? We would have to bring that back for a vote, obviously, if we decided to go with Raftellus or whatever vendor we may use to do that. Do we want to wait and see how tomorrow goes before we even say an amount?
I imagine you'll get bogged down in that discussion. You won't even be on the discussion.
Okay. Okay. All right, two other things.
Kemp,
and-
one quick question, Mr. Kemp. So Mr. Barnes, tomorrow, what is he going to, as the bond counsel for the water authority, what is his purpose tomorrow? What's he going to?
He was asked to come. He was asked to come to the meeting, just like you all asked me to come today. I think the facts are the facts, you know.
And our rates are very, very competitive and low right now. Them going at their own without having the backing of the power system and everything else in terms of revenue, it's gonna make them a more risky potential.
Well, be mindful that you're gonna diffuse bonds and the rates are gonna go up. So who's gonna pay if the rates go up?
Right, it's gonna be the
Time
trade
we've
payers.
got now. It's gonna be,
I will say this, just looking at your numbers, again, like Dr. Keller said, it's not all about numbers. Your numbers, let's talk about Griffin real quick. You have excellent coverage. In other words, the systems, just looking at water sewer, if we exclude electric, just looking at water sewer, you have excellent coverage on net income available to pay debt service on the bonds and the GFA loans. the county does as well. Their system has a lot less debt on it than we've got, but their coverage is very similar to yours. And an issue that we don't know would be if this new entity did acquire your system and their system, what do they have to spend? Talking about the new authority, what would that new authority have to spend to get everything up to par? An engineering firm, some sort of outside outfit could look at the value of the assets, the age of the assets, and look at things that might need fixing, both at the city and at the county. So that's another thing we don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, two other things that relate to a joint water authority. We were served with a letter from Mr. Wilson on behalf of Chairman Lamb in regards to the plant number 1, which is also referred to as Howland Mills or Springs plant. During the water sales contract discussion, there was discussion about us taking over the acceptance of sewage flow and the customers and the assets and customers from that area. So I have given you a copy of that letter as well as the map on the back that shows that. They just said, here, accept it, and had Dr. Keller and me sign it, but that we can't do that. I don't have the authority to do that on your behalf, and the amount of things that need to be discussed as to our acceptance, we're still working out as staff. So I did just want to let y'all be aware of this, because I have had it for a few days now. But we are still preparing our response as to how all that needs to take place. And I've talked with Mr. Raylan, we believe it actually needs to go through an IGA to say this is what all needs to take place before we can accept this. It's not just yet, just hand them over and we'll start sending them the city of Griffin bill with those rates.
My understanding is this territory here, anybody that's on the existing system, basically, they would not have to pay the sewer capacity recovery fee.
Correct.
But any future tie-ons in this district would be subject to that.
They're paying for the capital costs on the investment right now in order to get it to North 9th Street, which is significant, plus their portion is. So, yeah, you're right. The people that are there, the new people that tie on will have a capital cost.
So is that crystal clear for the county that that's the plan, so that anybody that's.
We've already had inquiries of 150 houses north of Kilgore Road. So, it will be.
Well, and that's another reason that we need something that's a little bit more detailed and in writing so that we can put that kind of term in there. The second thing that you have is also sort of in reference to those same customers. We have a current contract with the county to bill for the Highland Mills sewer customers, which expired in December of last year. So that needs to be addressed, and we have talked with Mr. Wilson and Ms. Wyndham in that regard. They have they have gone ahead and given us a little bit of information about it, and Ms. Wyndham drafted an agreement, but this contract's actually between the city of Griffin and Spalding County and their water authority customers. So even just the parties of the agreement aren't quite correct. So we have some work to do on that one as well. All of this could very much be a moot point if we do have a joint authority. But for the time being, while that's in discussions, these two items need to be addressed. And I just wanted to bring it to your attention that we are working through that as we speak. But since it was sort of related to that and could come up tomorrow, I wanted you to have a heads up on those two things too.
Any questions of board members?
Once we have those ready, we'll make sure to bring them back for a vote.
Thank you. Okay, we're ready to go into the fourth item.
Please.
So discuss zoning guidelines, Planning Development Director Chad Jacobs will address.
So in light of one of the previous meetings we had, I believe it was Commissioner Ward mentioned something about doing a possible some zoning kind of refresher information with our planning and zoning board. And so I thought, well, and also in light of numerous applications that we're getting that are kind of coming down the pipe, we would start with you guys and just kind of go over some just, high level zoning information, and then see if that brings forth any questions, and then we'll just kind of move from there. So what we'll talk about first is zoning procedures law, which is essentially the state statute. So it's under OCGA 3666-2. Basically, while recognizing and confirming the authority of local governments to exercise zoning power within their respective territorial boundaries, it is the intention of this chapter to establish as state policy minimum procedures governing the exercise of that power. The purpose of these, again, minimum procedures is to assure that due process is afforded to the general public when local governments regulate the uses of property through the exercise of zoning power. And so essentially ZPL addresses hearings on proposed zoning decisions, notices of hearing, non-governmental initiated actions. This is an interesting setup that we got going here. Non-government initiated actions, reconsideration of defeated actions, and the procedure on zoning for property annexed into the municipality. So it seems to be that we're doing a lot of this lately. So through rezonings and annexations that are kind of going on of late. So then again, that's the state statute. And then so we take that into account, and then we devise our local zoning ordinance. So obviously we have to do those state minimum guidelines, and then we can kind of add on in certain areas to where we can be a little bit more strict and just not less. One thing that I would kind of impress upon y'all is consistency with the comprehensive plan. So this is within our Article 404B. So all amendments to this ordinance shall be consistent with the most current adopted future land use section of the City of Griffin Comprehensive Plan, as may be amended from time to time unless significant justification exists based upon analysis of the standards set forth in Section 405, which is what we'll do next. So we update our comp plan every 5 years. We have to have the next update has to be done by October of 2023. The county will be doing theirs. They're going to get started on theirs soon. They've got to have theirs updated by October of 2022. This is kind of interesting. It goes on to state here, the applicant shall bear the burden of proof and persuasion by demonstrating approval of a proposed amendment not consistent with the comprehensive plan is warranted based upon the evaluation of the standards set forth in Section 405. So what I would kind of press upon y'all is that where at all possible, you want to make sure that you're following your plan because it keeps you safe from litigation issues. So you don't want to get in and you're dealing with a lawsuit and then, they're basically kind of saying, well, Judge, they don't really follow their plan. They'll change it willy-nilly, so on and so forth. But there are some instances where you're going to have to look at them, you get from a macro down to a micro kind of level that, maybe we do need to look at this particular area. Maybe the plan, we kind of missed the boat on this. That's why it's super important when we do our update, we get a lot of input, from y'all, and the area residents and things of that nature, because it is the driving force of how you enforce, the zoning ordinance is going to drive how you implement that comp plan.
Hold on one second.
Yes.
Mr. Whalen, because I can see there's going to be a lot of talking. Politically speaking, as an elected official, do you have to stick to this plan, or can you elected by the people? You elected by you can cater to.
That's your discretion as a legislator.
Right.
And this zoning is clearly still in Georgia a legislative act.
Right.
It's not a judicial act. So you're not strictly bound. But, and I was going to talk about that as we get into it. I'll try to explain it a little bit more detail.
I think, and this is probably my biggest frustration being in elected government. We go through all these exercises and we talk about all the stuff we're supposed to do, and we make all these proclamations about what we're going to do and what we need to do, and when we get before we're going to do this. And if the certain people show up, all of that goes out of the window because now it becomes political. rather than I'm going to do what we've set out to do, all of what he's explaining now. This is the guidelines, but the guidelines don't matter if it's a certain group of people in here. And those guidelines are, and it's not to say that that's wrong. Everybody governs differently. And if it's no teeth in what we're saying, this is another time that we'll be going through another one of these exercises to say, okay, yeah, we're going to do this, but if the right person shows up in front of us, then for some of us, politically, that outweighs what we're about to talk about. Now, we're gonna spend a whole bunch of time on this, or y'all are, because I'm not gonna sit through it. So if this has no teeth, just politically speaking, it's just, how do we govern? All of what he's saying is correct. And I'm glad Ms. Ward suggested we need to talk about this stuff, but it never fails. We get down here and it just becomes political instead of doing what we're saying we're going to do.
And the seven of you have to deal with the politics.
Right.
We're here this morning. Chad's gonna talk about the practical aspects of zoning and give you some guidance. I was gonna talk about the law a little bit, but y'all got to deal with politics.
Right.
I'm here, I call balls and strikes. So that's kind of what we do on staff. So,
Thank you.
we call balls and strikes. So, but a great segue, what Commissioner McCord, which you state, is actually in part of our rezoning criteria in Article 4 or 5. It states, all proposed rezoning of property shall be evaluated in light of the following standards used to interpret the balance between an individual's right to the use of their property and the public health, safety, or general welfare of the community. That's pretty standard in most zoning ordinances. This is the key section that I underlined, which I think is kind of the segue here. In applying these standards, expression of opinions unsupported by objective factual analysis using criteria set forth below should not be considered by the Board of Commissioners. And when I was kind of pulling all together, I've read that language numerous times, but that just kind of really popped out at me. And I thought that was kind of important to underline.
Hold on one second. So if someone doesn't follow that, what you're about to read now, if a person or a group of people or a group of elected officials or a majority of the elected officials on their board decide that that's not what they want to do, what can happen to that person or to that group of elected officials? What is the team? What is the law?
Well, you're kind of getting ahead again because I was going to talk more about that
Okay.
and the legal consequences.
Do you want to do the presentation?
No, I don't want to do it. I'm just.
We're going to sit down there right now with us.
This is what we do. This is what we go through. Year in and year out, we go through these budget workshops, we go through these retreats or work sessions, whatever it is, and we say all of this stuff. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I said this a little bit.
So we know what the zoning, the code says.
You're right. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. So, no, it's all right. So when y'all get when a rezoning application comes in, you'll get a staff report from us. And so that staff report will obviously break down kind of, here's what's being presented before y'all. Going back to ZBL, we'll indicate, where we've done our proper advertising, put signage on the property, ads in the paper, things of that nature to make sure that we're compliant with zoning procedures law. But then we'll also get down, and once you start getting into the meat and potatoes of it all, is your criteria. So this is essentially A through I. And this is really the basis of, irrespective of what anybody else says or anybody else brings to the table, when I'm writing a recommendation and a staff report, it is purely based on this and nothing else. And that's really the only basis of the discussion of whether it's a property should be rezoned or not. Because basically all these criteria break down. Is it compliant with your comp plan? Is it, you're going to take into account existing uses in zoning of adjacent property? The next one I think is a key one. Whether the property to be affected by the zoning proposal has a reasonable economic use as currently zoned, although such use may not be its highest and best potential use. How often do you have somebody that comes in here and say, this needs to be zoned to its highest and best use? No, it doesn't. It has to have a reasonable economic use based on the ordinance. Whether the zoning proposal will permit a use that is suitable in view of the use and development of adjacent nearby properties. That makes sense. You know, you want to look at kind of what's going on around it. Is this going to stick out like a sore thumb, or is it going to fit into kind of an overall kind of mosaic of everything that's out there? The relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed upon the individual property owner, the applicant, by maintaining the existing zoning. That was always kind of tricky. Suitability of the subject property for the purposes for which the applicant seeks to have it rezoned, including availability of existing infrastructure. When required infrastructure is not available, applicant should address the means by which it will be provided. So here again, you know, does it have access to water, sewer, electricity, things of those nature? And if it doesn't, how are you addressing it? And as long as it's being adequately addressed, you're good. Compatibility of the applicant's proposed use of the property if rezoned with surrounding properties. Applicant should address measures to reduce negative impacts of the proposed use, including applicant's position on any conditions attached to a recommendation for rezoning by the zoning administrator and/or planning and zoning board. So here again, that's where, you know, oftentimes we'll maybe come in with some conditions, you know, buffering, maybe condition it to that specific use. So if you're going from a residential to a commercial use, you want to be real careful just giving a wide open commercial designation, because while maybe this particular commercial use that's being presented before you on that particular evening may fit, if that goes out of business and then somebody else comes in, because you have this whole list of uses that are allowed, maybe another one may not fit. I don't know. You kind of take those things into account. Whether there has been a change in the conditions of the subject property, any environmental or historic, cultural, aesthetic, length of time that the property has been vacant. So those are all the criteria that establishes the basis for rezoning. Then you move on to special use. So in every zoning ordinance you have what are permitted uses. Those are uses that are allowed as a matter of right. So in your residential zoning, like single-family residential zoning districts, can I build a single-family residential house without having to come and get permission from y'all? Absolutely. As long as I'm building it pursuant to that zoning district standards, the minimum square footage, setbacks, things of that nature. But let's say I want to come in and ask to do, I don't know, a church on that property. Well, if it's a special use, then they have to come before y'all. And because you're going to look at them on a case-by-case basis. May fit here, may not fit there. So you're going to kind of look at them under that criteria. So in 406A, those 6 guidelines there are the criteria that's tied to that, and I won't go through all of them. But just kind of wanted to give you guys a breakdown of all that information. You know, then same thing with like variances. There's criteria that's tied to variances as well. All variances come before y'all, and you guys are the final recommending body or the final approving body on that. So with that, just wanted to kind of throw out some information. I'm going to hand the football over to Drew, and then let him go through the legal aspect, and then love to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chad. Let me start with a little bit different approach. And zoning in Georgia never was finally approved in 1953. Actually, the United States Supreme Court, in a case involving the town of Euclid, New York, in 1926, first recognized and approved zoning as an exercise of police power. But Georgia, being a strong property law state and really favoring the property owner and the rights of that property owner to utilize their property as they saw fit over the rights of their neighbors and the community in general, would not recognize its use in Georgia until 1953 in the case out of the city of Atlanta. Since 1976, you have had in your state constitution language that gives the
power to zone exclusively to the governing authorities of our cities and county. The State General Assembly cannot zone property involves the planning for and the actual, application of land use to a specific property within the state. They can adopt laws of general application, such as laws regulating the building, let's say, of landfills, rock quarries, things of this nature, which have statewide application. And they can enact zoning procedures. Specifically, the language is this authorization shall not prohibit the General Assembly from enacting general laws establishing procedures for the exercise of zoning power. Now, that was added to the Constitution in 1976. You had no Zoning Procedures Act in our law until 1986. Some of you may remember, back at that time, State Representative Kathy Steinberg of DeKalb County. Kathy was by trade a land planner. She worked for ARC, Atlanta Regional Council. She was very good at what she did, although she did it on probably a more grandiose style than most small local governments were needing. But she basically, when she ran for and became elected, she actually worked as a planner. She worked for DeKalb County, both as a staff person and as a elected representative, county commissioner for, I think, one term, and then ran for state representative. And Kathy did more probably to advance zoning in this state than anyone has either before or after this time. But the state zoning procedures law enacted in 86, there was a case from early 1980s in which the Supreme Court of Georgia upheld DeKalb County's zoning ordinance back when Bob Gould was the chairman of the county commission. You may remember him. And that case had standards in it as to how the zoning powers would be exercised in DeKalb County. And the court approved that case and was so glowing in their approval of it that became known as the Gould factors. Those Gould factors later became part of another act Representative Steinberg had passed at the time, and kind of dovetail with the zoning procedures law requirement to have standards in your zoning ordinance. The third act that she passed was a conflict of interest in zoning law, which still stands pretty much as was initially passed today. So you've come from a place where zoning was held by the courts prior to 1986 to be a legislative act of police power, just like your various other powers that you have as elected officials, to a situation where by law you had to have standards that govern the exercise of the zoning power. But when it came up before the Supreme Court of Georgia in a series of cases, mostly right towards the end of the 1980s, they never would say that zoning was not a legislative act. Still a legislative act today, but they talked about it in terms of being quasi-judicial. Not fully judicial, not in the sense that a judge has to take the law as it exists, make a finding of fact, and then apply that law to the facts that he finds concludes them to exist. And also would have required, if it was a judicial act, would require you to come impartially before a zoning hearing and rule without any favor, fear, or affection towards any of the applicants or people in opposition to the zoning. You can come up here tonight at a zoning hearing. You can have bias, you can have prejudice. You may not like the applicant personally. You may not like somebody who speaks against the application. And you can allow those within reason to still not take away your right to vote as such. And that's where the politics comes in, the process. But what I wanted to talk about particularly is in your zoning ordinance. And I've gone back through this, by the way, with Chad over the last month. And honestly, I think the procedural section of the zoning ordinance, Unified Development Code, we call it now, it is still correct. I mean, I don't see anything we need to tamper with or revise there. But one thing we did discover that we were not doing, although we were doing this initially back in the 1980s after the zoning procedures law was passed. And that law says that printed copies of the adopted standards governing exercise of the zoning power and procedures governing the hearing have to be made available at the hearing to the public. We used to pass those out. We used to have a stack up and we would write them off on the copy machine. And as people came in the back door back here, we'd give them to them. And somewhere along the line, we quit doing that. We do have some general hearing procedures that are posted on this board back here on the wall. But your UDC section 408E basically says that at the public hearing, the zoning administrator shall advise the commission of the nature of the decision sought and the recommendation of the planning and zoning board and city staff when applicable. Now, let me stop there for a second. City staff is going to do the analysis based on the standards in the ordinance for every zoning that comes before you. That's the report you get from staff. Planning and zoning is really not required. You don't have to have a planning and zoning board. Most local governments create them kind of as an insulator. They're a citizen body that hears and makes a recommendation. That recommendation is not binding on the city in any fashion. So really, they're giving you some comfort or some insulation in there if you follow their recommendation in most cases. But they're not a mandatory board that you're required to have. They don't function otherwise than just to make that recommendation. It goes on to say the applicant or his attorney may then address the commission. Proponents, including the applicant or his attorney, shall have no less than 10 minutes for presentation of data, evidence, and expert opinions. Now, consider those three. Data, that may be, it could be maps, it could be statistics that show various things. Evidence, it could be an appraisal showing what properties are worth in the area with parcels to be zoned or rezoned. And expert opinions. You can bring in a land planner, have him testify as to good, proper planning techniques. It doesn't say it's just for the purpose of somebody getting up, espousing off what they thought at the moment was appropriate to say. You know, the thing that I guess kind of gets to me more than anything in a zoning hearing is everybody says, oh, this is going to degrade my property. It's going to lower the cost of the value of my property. I have yet to see a situation where it was rezoned that somebody really had a downward trend in the value of that property. That's just public opinion, and that's all it is. So it goes on in to say opponents of the proposed decision shall have an equal minimum period of time. And all of this comes right out of the state zoning procedures law. We track it verbatim. The chairman may grant additional time, it should now say the mayor, provided, however, an equal period of time should be granted both sides. Chairman may limit repetitious comments in the interest of time and may call for a show of hands of those persons present in favor or opposed to the proposed decision. What I'm going to suggest to you all tonight, you were here a long time a month ago. I would limit it to the 10 minutes per side. You certainly heard, and still I'm sure it's fresh on your mind, what you heard a month ago with that hearing. There's no reason to have that repeated tonight. I would give both sides 10 minutes, let them get up, and in the 10 minutes, you call the hearing off. It's closed. I know it sounds harsh.
Who's the timekeeper?
I can keep time for you if you want to. I'll be happy to do it.
Will this, just like when we ask for public comment, will someone read a disclosure saying what we're doing?
And I think it'd be appropriate to make a statement at the beginning of the hearing.
So my question is, if there are opponents there that are directly affected in terms of adjacent property owners or thing versus someone that just has a feeling that's not, do they have a direct impact that affects them?
Let me kind of move into that as well. That was one of the things I was going to talk about as well, and that's the issue of standing and find where I put them. One of the things our state Supreme Court has talked about, two cases at least, there's two, I located them today. One of them is a case of RCG Properties LLC versus City of Atlanta from 2003. The other is one that somebody up here may know a little something about. It's called Holberg versus Baldwin County from 2006. And in both cases, the Supreme Court talks about the standing of the person challenging in court of various zoning actions. To have standing to challenge an action other than being the applicant itself, you have to be the owner of either adjacent or nearby property. Now, I don't know how close nearby is, but that's the words, the language of the court. And the other thing, though, you have to have are what the court calls special damages. You've got to show that you were injured in a way different from the majority of everyone else in the community or anybody else around you.
Just new batteries.
Okay, I think I talked about enough without it anyway, but those are the two criteria for standing. So if somebody is an adjacent owner, they were not heard the last time, I think I would suggest that they be allowed to come up and speak first. But when that 10 minutes is up, it's over. And I think
You said something about,
Yes, ma'am.
raise your hand for those in favor and those.
Yeah, I think that's certainly appropriate. We got chairs back in here tonight, so it shouldn't be people outside tonight like we had the last time.
So in regards to the standing, someone that lives 5 miles out and they're concerned about traffic congestion, they don't necessarily have standing because they don't live
That's
there.
right. That's how population in
Someone
general will be
that, and
affected.
so on the other side, someone that says, say it's a workforce housing advocate that may not live anywhere near that, they necessarily don't have standing either. Is that?
I would say that if you had an adjacent property owner who has had their property appraised by a certified real estate appraiser, and the appraiser's opinion is that, as the subject property is currently zoned, value is X, but in my opinion, if it's rezoned, it goes down to Y, I think that would give you standing to be heard. But short of that, if it's just, I live 5 miles out past this, but still I have to come through that intersection every day and traffic's already bad, it's gonna be worse, I don't think it gives you standing.
Yeah, they can,
Corey, yeah,
I raise my hand.
Yes.
So in the event that the applicant speaks for 15 minutes, even though we've said 10, nobody will.
We're gonna stop him at 10.
That's
Okay, but just from my understanding, the precedent that is then set is that the opposition would also have 15 minutes.
They're gonna get the same length of time.
Okay, so I'm asking because even going forward, 6 months down the road, we maintain that standard that however long we allow the applicant, then that is also what we ascribe to the opponent.
Right.
Okay,
Now, we'd be in good shape. I don't feel like that's the basis of a court challenge.
I think in this case it's easy because we've heard the previous to say, 10 minutes, but certainly for something that we've never heard, 10 minutes may not be realistic,
Right.
but as long as we equally apply and say, well, we gave them 17 minutes, so now opposition has 17 minutes.
Honestly, if I were representing an applicant under this ordinance, I would ask for it in advance of the hearing. I wouldn't wait till you got to the hearing and then run out of 10 minutes and say, hey, can I have 5 more minutes? Ask for it in advance and know if you're gonna have it or not.
Okay. So it just, Chad, is that something that in the future, when we are having discussions with applicants, that we can let them know in terms of presentations, there are some time constraints?
Absolutely.
So that it's, I'm okay if the first time we hear something, it's 15 minutes or something, but certainly understanding for them that like, don't stand up here for 45 minutes for the presentation.
Well, like, we've got the ladies coming back to us in terms of West Broad Street tonight, or East Broad Street tonight. We've already heard, so basically she's gonna come back and bring additional data to us for us to consider.
Correct. There's some supplemental information that was provided, that's on the notes agenda. We'll address it to a degree in the staff report.
How is it affected, because sometimes staff does a presentation and then the applicant may come behind them. And then sometimes there's some conferring during presentations. Is there any basis for if staff is involved or if the applicant comes up to speak during staff's presentation?
Well, under the way the UDC is written, Chad's always gonna do the introduction, basically.
Okay,
He's gonna tell you what the property is zoned, how they want it to be zoned, or what action they want you to take.
mm-hmm,
He's gonna tell you what the staff report says, what the planning commission did.
mm-hmm,
Then he sits down.
okay,
Then the applicant starts his 10 minutes. If he wants to talk with one person, if he wants to have 5 people, it's up to him.
mm-hmm,
He utilizes that 10 minutes, then the opponents have got 10 minutes, utilize as they see fit.
okay. And I only ask because there's always a human element to everything. And somebody's gonna say, I just have to say this last thing. So I would say that as a board, as long as we consistently maintain that going forward, that whatever we allow on one side is the limitation for the other side, I'm okay with it.
And tonight you're planning to have that document available. You remember, this is gonna happen from here on out. Might as well have a couple hundred copies and we'll have it
Put
available
that together this afternoon for
in
you.
the future.
And
We
then
each
for
have a
you.
copy of it here so that we can have a quick look at it.
Can we get just for intents and purposes, can we get a big copy and like put it on the door into the courtroom?
Well, there's something up there, I remember.
Yeah, but-
Someone mentioned that.
No, these are general, kind of general hearing instructions,
Yeah.
not just zoning.
Just something that, so that there, because we make assumptions that people will come in and read this piece of paper, but at least we can say like, hey, there was some advance notice, because I doubt that it'll be a popular decision. You come to the meeting, you wanna be able to talk.
He's gonna have the
I kind of want to ask a
handouts
question.
for tonight.
Ms. Moore.
Yeah, but he's gonna have the handouts ready to go tonight.
I'll pull the information from the code, and basically put it on a flyer, if you will, we can post it on the door, and then we'll have them, so people can grab copies, as they'd like, so that way it's satisfying, the intent of the UDC.
Is that something that we are allowed to put on the wall similar to that? So is that something that, not for tonight, but going forward, we can just
Yeah,
have
I'll see it ready to go.
it posted? Okay, because we do have a lot of zoning hearings. I agree.
Ms. Ward has a question or comment.
A question that's accounted for the round. Okay. If we go according to the zoning, I understand y'all were saying, even after everything has been presented and we vote, we still have the right, each one of us have a right to vote however we choose. It does not matter whether we follow the zoning.
That's correct.
But
There are no repercussions for
Okay.
not doing
for not following zoning.
it. Right.
But in the
Unfortunately.
event, because of certain circumstances, someone files a suit against us because of something we did not follow, or we assume a liability in what's going on.
I pretty much can take care of that with no problem.
Hmm.
I can handle that. if they-
Okay, even a fair housing.
Yeah.
Fair housing, you can handle that.
On fair housing,
Yeah,
that may be a little bit different twist to things, but I think it would have to be only one part of the evidence that there's a fair housing violation. Not just this one act by itself.
The one act of not voting, not agreeing to something.
Keep in mind that in 2000, what year did I tell you it was? We entered into a consent agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice to settle that housing complaint on group housing. You recall that?
That's 2010.
2000, that sounds about right. maybe even, I thought maybe a little later, 2012, 13, so. But, you know, anything involved housing today, I would just be cautious in your handling because that is, in fact, President Biden now in office is now again a hot button issue at the Justice Department. You will see.
But in the event that there are fair housing, complaints brought against us, and they are found to be able to stick, or that it was determined that we violated something in fair housing, how would it?
I think they'd have to show a consistent pattern of turning down opportunities to build affordable housing. Not just a single instance of an apartment complex being turned down. You following me?
Yeah, I'm following you, but
I don't think
we
we
have already had some fair housing issues.
We have had a fair housing issue, but it related to group housing. It did not relate to any, you know.
But even in the event that it's found that we violated something in fair housing, how would that affect us as a city?
Well, if you get a civil rights complaint, it could ultimately lead to your inability to receive federal grants and funding.
Not just in housing,
That would be not just for housing.
for everything.
But that's two questions, right? The responsibility of us as an individual, as a legislator, and then the responsibility of us as a board.
Right.
And so what you're saying is, as an individual legislator, we're kind of covered by the fact that we're individually voting. But as a board and an entity, there could be some concern if there's found to be a pattern, how it affects.
Yeah, I think the city as an entity,
Okay,
you know, has got a duty or a responsibility to follow the Fair Housing Act. Actually, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, 65, basically says you don't discriminate on any basis. So, you know, housing would be one of those bases.
So layman terms is some of our political decisions up here can affect not just housing, it possibly affect airport or any other federal.
If possible, as far as eligibility for federal funding grants.
So when we politic from these seats up here to, for whatever reason, we'd be putting the city as a whole at risk.
right.
What was it that happened, Drew, I'm sure you remember, before when we were blackballed? And I think that was probably just in housing, some years ago back. This is before I came on board.
That was way back yonder. And the city, that's back in the Lewis, Skeeter, and Tiki days, when they basically wouldn't approve any kind of rental house, multifamily housing. And not because they were opposed to multifamily housing as much as they were, didn't want to see competition, I think, for certain individuals who own rental housing. And we didn't know for several years, apparently Justice had kind of taken an adverse view of that, they never bothered to tell us. But we found it later in some documentation, I think maybe even during the voting rights suit, where we came up with a memo. That was a long time back.
So are we all comfortable with this direction?
I'm just gonna be frank but honest, I'm never comfortable with, because see, we started this, the last time we met, we allowed people just to get up here and just talk there was no limit, and they weren't even city residents. But we allowed people to come to our board, to our meeting, pretty much take over to talk as long as they want to. Matter of fact, say whatever they want to, and really not be challenged by anyone. Just let them talk freely, pop off whatever they wanted to say anything they wanted to. And now we got another group of people that wants to support this, and it just appears that now we want to limit it to 10 minutes. Now, I'm not comfortable with it. I don't want anybody to say, put it on me, that I limited their time when before we allow people to, who we
No,
don't
let's
even
do this,
represent.
you put it on me, because I told y'all to follow your ordinance.
Right, exactly. It should have been, we should have been following it the first time, but now we want to follow it. Before, we didn't want to follow it. And we allow people who we don't even represent to come in, chastise, lie, berate, spew off whatever they wanted to, with no limit of time. We open the floor and just let them talk. Now, I'm, you know, well, we can do, y'all can do whatever, but if I'm asked the question, should this person get to speak for or against? I would be let them speak and y'all can vote me down, or however y'all want to do it, but if you've done it before and you let these people who have no standing, let them talk, and we got citizens who live in the city of Griffin who want to speak for or against it, then I would, me personally, would have a problem, and y'all can put it on.
Well, and y'all don't know this, but during that last hearing, I was texting Doug and telling him that y'all need to be back in control of the hearing. It was your ordinance, and y'all were not following. You know, so-
Yes, Ms. Flowers.
I did not ask previously, and I'm glad Rodney said this, but I asked about the applicant and I asked about the opposition. What about those in favor? Or how does that, so the
I think they
applicant.
need to use it, part of the applicant's 10 minutes time.
And that is detailed in the ordinance, and but also understand, it very specifically says proponents, those four, including the applicant or his attorney, shall have no less than 10 minutes for presentation of data, evidence, and expert opinions. Opponents of the proposed decision shall have an equal minimum period of time. It's a minimum. You have to give them at least 10 minutes. You can give them whatever you want. Now, I don't advise that, but it has to be the same amount. So if the proponent is going first and they only have people speak for 20 minutes, then the opponents only get 20 minutes as well. That's how it works.
Unless you stop them at 10.
I guess my only concern, kind of based on what Rodney said, is where I totally agree with it. If the applicant uses 10 minutes for his presentation, then we have effectively negated the citizen's ability to say that they do agree with it.
Right.
And without,
Would you like to expand 10 minutes? It says at least 10. You want to
Yeah, I think
give
that's
15 or 20?
what Jeff's was saying,
Per
yeah, there's a minimum there, and if you guys are gonna allow those to speak in favor, just whatever the equal weight is gonna be for each
Maybe they
side.
should do it through a citizen comment, because look, they may not be in particular about the project itself. There are people that want to speak for fair housing. And maybe that should be a time that they should speak during citizens' comment.
we did, but we need to keep our 3 minutes because we
Right,
struggle with
let's see
it.
again, and if we,
And how do you keep up with those that have already spoken before? Who's gonna keep up with, we've already heard from you, just to keep.
If you limit the time will run out.
So I would be comfortable going forward if we will let the applicant know they have a time limit, but we allot additional time for supporting comments in that same
And that
way.
total time has got to be given to the opponent.
Right, but as long as we let the
Yeah, but y'all-
applicant know, like, hey, there's 20 minutes,
Y'all will
but you
tell us
don't get
now,
the
we will
whole.
draft something for the chairman to read at the opening of the hearing.
maybe I'm missing something. In past meetings, the question is, the make the presentation, then the mayor, chairperson says, is there anyone here to speak for or against this matter? Are we now saying we're not going to do that anymore?
I think you'll have to ask.
You have
Anybody for?
For,
So
and then-
we ask, is there anybody that's in support?
And then we just tack that
But
time
what if someone's
on.
just asking a question, whether they don't know if they're for
But
or
that's
against?
one of the other things that we need to be very cognizant of. This is not a question and answer session.
Right.
It very clearly tells you what a public hearing is for, and we've gotten really into the question and answers. And what happened last time was we got really into allowing them to speak to them. They're here for a public hearing to speak to you all. They're supposed to be presenting data, evidence, and expert opinions. It has nothing about question and answer session. This is their presentation to you as to why they're for it and why they're against it, and they're trying to sway your vote. That's the whole purpose.
I know y'all are trying to be accommodating to the public. This is for public comment, It's not question and answer session.
The Q and A
This is not a
would be with
debate.
us.
Yeah.
Any questions that y'all would have would be with us.
With the
Yes.
staff.
Staff. And then if you have a specific question for that, then we'll have it, but ultimately it's for us.
And practically speaking, I think there's two issues particular to tonight. One, we've already done this once, and so it seems a little unfair, almost in the middle of it, to say, now we're gonna limit you to 10 or 20 or whatever it is. But that's what our ordinance says, and that's what we've required. So at some point, you're just gonna have to say, this is what we're doing. If you're not comfortable doing that tonight, since you have two that you've already heard and allowed people to speak either for or against for an unlimited period of time, then don't do it tonight and say, going forward, this is what we're going to do because it's gotten out of hand. But also, it's practically speaking, McDonough did this when we represented them. You let them know ahead of time and they work it out amongst themselves and they say, okay, this person speaks well, we want them to speak for us. Y'all know they've had community meetings, they know who's gonna say what, so they can get together and say, we want these 3 people to have 4 minutes each or 3 minutes each, they stay in that 10 minutes, and that's how we're gonna do it. That's McDonough had a clock that sat right there, that the mayor would press the button, and it would let them know, you're at 8.5 minutes. So that last person may have only gotten a minute and a half, even though they planned for something different. But it's much more controlled that way, and you still get the information that you need. And then after that presentation is made, again, by the applicant and proponent first, the proponents first, you know how much time you're gonna have to give the opponent, and you can very easily say to this room, who agrees with what was just said? Show of hands, we can count them, or you can sort of see. And then after the opponent goes and you got those 1, 2, or 3 that spoke, then you've got a show of hands as well. So you know where you see.
We're also getting information from people that are contacted through emails, through
Well,
phone
that's
calls.
my next question.
Yeah, so we're getting all sorts of stuff.
Right, but,
Yeah,
we have formally said, and I just got one as we were sitting here, that they are allowed to comment via email now or seamless doc submission. And it's going to be, I was gonna mention this tonight in comments, it's my recommendation that now that we are back open to full capacity meetings to stop, because that's gonna get real confusing is how because it's my time that I'm having to read these count, or how do we handle that? So I think after tonight, we need to take that off.
We've got another on the Cold Creek, and already they're having meetings, and half these people don't even live over there. And I'm getting questions from people that live, they're not in my
Well,
district.
the
or they
petition
live
for
in
Milner, that was people in South Carolina.
Right.
And
Let me make 2 other quick points. Number 1, the applicant is represented by a new attorney. I talked to him late yesterday afternoon. He will be here. He's an experienced zoning attorney. He used to be a county attorney down in Upson County. Now, he tells me that only one person is planning to speak for the applicant. Tonight's meeting. And that's the former commissioner. Point number 2 is that this is unusual somewhat in that you've got an annexation and a zoning request. The annexation law requires, or the zoning procedures law requires you, when you annex property, to zone it. But there is no right to have property annexed into a city in Georgia. If you want to turn down every application for annexation, it's probably not the wise thing to do, but you certainly do not have to even give a reason. If you're gonna vote them down, and that way you don't ever reach zoning.
What do you say?
You don't ever reach the zoning issue.
Okay.
If it's not in the city, you can't zone it.
Got it.
So keep that in mind tonight.
There was also dialogue in regards to the county having the right to legally object, to cause us to come together and try to negotiate terms in different.
Well,
Procedural
that
stuff,
was
I know
made
that-
known to the county manager.
Right.
And they did not follow that procedure. They elected to do otherwise, so that's their business.
I understand, but in the future, I think the county's been made aware that they made a mistake. Going forward, they may object.
They knew they made a mistake when they made it. I talked to their attorney.
I understand,
Yeah.
but we've got some others that are coming up, so in the future, there may be this.
And that only applies to property, it's on the periphery of the city limits.
Correct, so there may be.
Yeah, and the ones in the city.
You have 2 annexations actually tonight.
Right.
So there's a second one this evening, so, and actually, they voiced no intention or opposition to that. So here and then,
But there may be another one coming
there
out.
could. So
in
and they
the
would have to
future,
follow the state
there may be
statute.
another step in this whole process where we have to sit down with the county.
Right.
By law, they would need to follow the state statute. By city-county relationship and how we want to jointly plan, Mr. Galloway asked Mr. Jacobs and I last Friday if we could have a joint planning session about the west side of town because of annexation. They know that there's some other property ripe for annexation in that area. And he said, can we all sit down? Well, of course we can. Why wouldn't we? So we're gonna, Mr. Wilson actually sent me an email as well just now saying, please give us some dates that we can do that, and he will ask his on his May 3rd agenda. So, we don't get quite so formal to have to put it on an agenda to come up with dates, but I will reach out to y'all for those. At this point, I think it's going to have to be after budget, so end of May or 1st of June, before we can sit down for that. But I don't think that's a bad idea by any means, so that will be addressed as well. Yes.
Okay, for tonight, obviously we have the ordinance. Because we have allowed kind of unfettered dialogue at the last meeting regarding these issues, can we make sure that we specifically ask for those who are in support, add that to the time of the presentation, and then extend that also to the opponents? Going forward, we can maybe work out the logistics, but I do want to make sure tonight that we don't exclude anybody. So I know if the language, we can specifically say, okay, at this point, those who are in favor, now is the time to come up and speak.
I agree, and I kind of agree with the concern kind of going midstream, kind of doing this. The best time I think to start enforcing this would be on nights where you're not dealing with real controversial issues. So that way it's becoming, just part of what you do, whether it's the little spiel that needs to be read, and things that need to be handed out, all that. So that way, then when you do ultimately, because for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just I'm a magnet for controversy, but it's just like all these controversial zonings have just kind of hit in a real tight little pocket. We will this will obviously let up, and then you're going to start going through months again where it's just going to be either nothing's on the agenda from a zoning standpoint, or they're going to be real basic, special use variances, what have you, nothing that's really going on, that you'll still kind of lay down kind of the ground rules, but there really would be nobody in the crowd that's going to be an issue. But then there will be that one out hit, and maybe it's cold water, that however many weeks, months, whatever down the pipe, then that'll hit, and you're going to have a room full that's coming. Then you're already a well-oiled machine. Everybody already knows what to expect, and
When you make the handout, pass it out to the elected officials.
Yes, sir.
Those are people that need it. People in the audience, they're only going to do what they are allowed to do. So if we started it tonight, which we won't because of who will be in the audience.
Sure.
But whenever we start it, when we change it, whenever we have this meeting, and there's nobody here, and we change it to do that, when a certain group of people show up in here, all of that stuff is going to go out of the window.
I'll bet we're gonna do it tonight. Money on that. I got you.
All right, now, y'all 10 minutes each side, or you want 15?
Tell,
It depends, Mr. Whalen, it all depends on who's in here.
So let's set it how we want to do it tonight. So we'd let the applicant do the presentation and ask for any other folks that are in favor of it to speak, and then whatever that time is, and if this is okay with y'all, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
And then if it's, we're a team and we work, so if it's 20 minutes,
I don't get to make a decision, that's you.
well, okay, this is my thought. Nobody wants to stay in here for a 5-hour meeting, but last time we stayed for 3. So yes, I think we need to be mindful that this is not, we completely cut it off. I would rather not stay 3, but if we have to stay 2 so that we're able to offer some fairness, that's fine. So I feel like the applicant goes, supporters go, whatever that time frame is, then that's what we give to the opponent.
So if somebody disagrees, so if I get up and I started talking and I was in favor, if somebody jumps up and they bring up something that's totally nonsense that I disagree with, or somebody that is in favor of it disagree with it. So now they can't come back up because this is just for the state the case, and this is the rebuttal. This person, they don't get to say anything else on this side If somebody says, oh, they're just going to build Spalding Heights, they're not going to allow anybody to live over here, but black people and poor people, can somebody on the other side say, wait a minute, that's not true?
And
I
it's
want
not,
to.
it's not like a court proceeding.
Exactly.
It's a statutory hearing in accordance with the zoning procedure law.
All right, thank you. Y'all do it however
And,
you want.
and Brian, I think to your credit, you're absolutely right, and what Drew said is that it is very political, so it doesn't matter what procedure we put in place, someone will,
Someone's feelings are gonna get hurt and be mad.
someone, well, not even the constituency,
One
us.
thing that, as a board, that we should do is follow meeting decorum, the
Yes.
protocol.
That's-
We should not be cheering with whoever is talking.
Right.
We have a vote, and we should not start pronouncing what our vote is, because I think that's some kind of illegal.
And honestly, you're not trying to explain your vote.
Yeah, exactly. We shouldn't do that.
Standing ovations.
Okay, so to kind of piggyback off that, and that's what Commissioner Orr kind of brought up previously, you know, that's what, I mean, obviously, Drew said that you guys, you know, have, you know, you can vote how you want to vote, you know, the politics kind of play into what we all do. And what I would stress is just be careful in terms of before the vote is given, you know, giving reasons for it, or even after the vote is given, any type of, you know, substantiating why this is my vote or whatever. I would, if you're gonna do that, to me, and Drew may, you know, correct me, I would keep it tied to the criteria that's within the UDC, and I think that then you're treading on much safer ground.
That we're not gonna do,
So,
I can already tell you that we're not gonna do. But I do agree.
but that's just my advice.
I agree, and I bet it's the best thing, but we're not gonna do it.
What you're saying, give a reason for your vote?
Don't.
Don't.
No, yeah, I'm saying if you feel you have to, I would just always recommend tying it to the criteria. And that's why I said earlier, you know, how, you know, we just call balls and strikes, but we're gonna give you a staff report that's based purely on the criteria, and nothing else.
Honey, we legislate, we gonna give our opinion. I do want us to see going forward to make sure that we implement this. And I want us to be as considerate as possible tonight, so I don't want us to go from, we let them talk 3 hours last night to now we're like, okay, that was 20 minutes, the whole thing is done. But I also don't wanna stay here 5 hours, so however y'all can negotiate a balance where we do allow those who want to speak with, maybe without all of the frivolity of like, I live 20 miles away and this is the worst thing ever. I don't know how we necessarily police that during tonight's meeting, because we've kind of set a precedent. But I don't want us, like, and I'm glad Rodney said that, I don't want us to have people who want to speak for it and we've negated them because we didn't really understand.
That's why you asked to show of hands.
Okay,
Can, also, the issue, if someone's already spoken at a previous public hearing on a subject, is there any need for those folks to need to come back up?
I don't know how we're gonna.
I'm just asking
You're
you a
gonna have
question.
Nancy flipping through.
I would encourage them not to.
Figure out if it's the
Okay.
same
I
person.
would encourage you to get somebody else.
I'm just trying, okay,
Put it in
that's
part.
fine, all right.
And Mayor, if I can say one other thing, I don't know, I was looking at the agenda for tonight, in the information that you read, like during citizen comment, you make that sort of on the left or right.
City business.
And then public hearings, I think you do read that
I
statement.
do.
If you want me to maybe add a little
You
bit
can
to
add
it,
that
because
too.
we can't say, if anybody on my left, if we're gonna do the whole timing for supporters and applicant versus timing for opponents, we're gonna have to sort of change how we
Yeah, so
say
it's gonna be
that.
opponent, I mean, the pros will be going first,
Proponents, opponents.
opponents, and then,
I'll draft something for you.
Okay,
Pat.
we'll have that. and always looking for guidance.
Okay.
So one last thing, if you're done, Drew, Truman's with Wileen today, so just keep Wileen and her family and friends in prayers. And he hopes to be here this evening, but that's where he's at today.
And not to
Thank you.
that subject, but one other thing that Chad just mentioned, practically speaking, it would be helpful, not tonight, but in the future, if we have, help Susan too, if we have a sign-in sheet that says I'm speaking for and I'm speaking against, you'll sort of know what to expect.
Name, address.
Name and address, because we have a very hard time understanding at times, especially with masks, or they don't want to give an address. If it's already written, then if we're gonna say you can't speak at another public hearing about the same matter, we would have that and we could just check it
I mean,
off.
quite literally, the mayor could call up, all right, on.
Who y'all done made
you know,
this thing so complicated?
you know,
I feel like I'm in court here.
The sign-in sheet sounds good, but y'all want another job?
Put a
Y'all would
place
be
on
in
there,
charge of
did they
sign-in
speak
sheet?
last hearing?
Honestly, it would be easier during the meeting to already have it,
But what if they don't sign in and they still on top?
They come in, you just have them sign in, you know, you have one or two that might struggle. I did it for 13 years. Happens every so often. You're gonna have one or two that are struggling kind of late, and you just when they come up to speak, have them sign in at that time. But like I said, it's only been, you're gonna get usually like 95% folks sign in.
Okay, so how is it gonna be managed? You got your little sign-in sheet for and against. And on the
Table
fourth
back here,
side,
somebody
there's
else.
Right now,
five
on the table
people.
as they walk in the door.
At 6 o'clock, you should take it down.
Because people gonna come late, this is what I'm telling
They're
you.
late, because they won't hear my.
So if it's 5 people on the floor and 30 people on the
And
against,
that happens.
then what,
then the people on the against will already know, okay, there's only 5 for, so we're all 30 not gonna be able to speak. We need to get together and decide who's gonna speak, because we're not gonna have time for 30 of us to speak. Because we know these 5 are not gonna take an hour, they're gonna take.
And I know, I'll touch too, you get a lot of folks that are reiterating the same thing.
of course.
That the next person, that the person before them said, or the person after, there's a lot of reiteration, so I have seen it offered up too, and some things, you know, if your views have already been expressed, you know, kind of thing, you know.
They say it's gonna take this quality of the school system. Well, you don't need 20 people to say it's gonna affect it. All it's gonna say the train is blocking the road.
Somebody from the school system to say it's gonna affect the quality of the school system?
For it to be data.
That's not one of your standards in your.
Right, so the school system, it's affecting traffic.
I've never heard anybody say anything about a school system when we build something on the north side of town.
Amen.
We've never
You
once,
just
not,
squeeze them all
not,
in.
not one time have we ever said, man, we don't, this is, oh my God, Moore Elementary, they gonna have too many kids over there. Oh, what is it gonna do to Kennedy Road? We've never, ever, since I've been on the board, ever said anything about what's going on with the schools when we started talking about rezoning or building something. I'm just amazed when I heard some of the stuff that came out and that was taken into consideration about, only thing that was of concern may have been the traffic. But all of that other stuff, it was just, I'm still just in awe. I've been in a fog since that meeting, trying to figure out, like, how did we get here? How did people on the board get to this point? That this, are we serious about this? Like, I'm opposed to limiting people to talk, so, yeah, I'm just gonna be adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Second by Ms. Murray.